Section 72 of Through Fairy Halls of My Book House. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Through Fairy Halls of My Book House, edited by Olive Beaupre Miller. Prince Cherry, from the French of Madame la Princesse de Beaumont. Once upon a time there was a king who led so gracious and praiseworthy a life that his subjects called him the Good King. One day as he was out hunting, a little white rabbit, closely pursued by the hounds, threw itself into his arms. The king at once began to pet and stroke the little creature, and he said, "Since you have come to me for protection, I shall see that you are well cared for." He then carried the rabbit home to his palace, ordered a pretty little house to be made for it, and gave it abundance of fresh green things such as rabbits love to eat. That very same night, when he had retired alone to his chamber, there suddenly appeared to him a beautiful lady. She was dressed in neither gold nor silver, but her flowing robes were as white as snow, and on her head she wore a crown of white roses. The good king was greatly astonished to behold such a sight, for his door was locked, and he did not see how anyone could have found entrance. But the lady in white explained. "I am the fairy Candide," she said. "I have heard much of your goodness, and as I chanced to be passing through the wood while you were hunting, I felt a great desire to know if you were truly as good as men say you are. To discover this, I took the form of a rabbit and sought protection in your arms, for I was sure that he who would be merciful to a dumb beast would be at least as merciful to his fellow men. Had you refused me your protection, I should have concluded that you were wicked in your heart, in spite of all your show of goodness. But you deserve the name by which you are called. You are the Good King. I thank you for your kindness, and assure you that I will always be your friend. You have only to ask what you most desire, and I promise you, if it be within my power, your wish shall be granted." "Madame," said the good king, "I have one well-beloved and only son, Prince Cherry. If you have any kindly feeling for me, I pray you become for my sake the friend and protectress of my son." "Willingly," said the fairy. "I can make your son the handsomest, the richest, or the most powerful prince in the world. Which of these gifts do you choose for him?" "I choose none of them," answered the good king. "I choose to have you make him the best of all princes. Of what use would riches or beauty or power be to him if he were wicked in his heart? You know very well, madame, that it is goodness alone which can make him happy." "You have spoken well," said the fairy Candide, "but much as I might wish to do so, it is not in my power to make Prince Cherry a good man. That is something each one must do for himself. All I can promise you is to give him good advice. I can point out his faults to him and punish him if he will not repent of his wickedness and correct it." The good king was well content with this promise, and shortly afterwards he died, leaving his throne to his dearly beloved son. 2 days after this, Prince Cherry was resting in his chamber when the fairy Candide appeared to him just as she had to his father. "I promised your father," she said to him, "to be your friend, and in order to keep my word to him, I am come to make you a present." She placed on Cherry's hand a little gold ring, and continued, "Take great care of this ring. It is not much to look at, but it is in truth more precious than diamonds. Whenever you are about to do something wrong, it will prick your finger. In this way you will always know when you are doing evil. But if, in spite of the warning, you still continue in the error of your ways, then you will lose my friendship altogether." As she finished speaking, she disappeared, leaving Cherry so greatly amazed that he almost thought himself dreaming. But there in truth was the ring on his finger. For some time he was so wise and good that it did not prick him at all. But one day he was out hunting, and it chanced that he found no game whatever. This put him into an ill humor, and he began to show his vexation in his face and manner. At this his ring grew tight and uncomfortable, but it did not prick him, so he paid no further heed to it. He was returning to his chamber when his little dog Bibi ran as usual to meet him, and leaped up and down before him, licking his hand and inviting caresses. But the prince cried out impatiently, "Out of my way, sir! I'm in no humor to play with you." The poor little dog, who had been accustomed to nothing but petting and did not understand a word that his master said, kept on leaping before him and began to tug at his clothes to win at least his attention. This made Cherry so angry that he altogether lost his temper and gave his poor little pet a kick that sent him across the room. Instantly the ring pricked him as sharply as though it had been a pin. "What?" he cried. "My ring pricking me for this! The fairy must be making game of me. Is it a crime to kick an animal that was teasing me? Why am I ruler over a mighty empire, if I may not even kick my own dog?" "Nay," said a voice in answer, "the master of a mighty empire has the right to do good, but not evil. If it were permitted for the great to ill treat those beneath them, I could at this very moment beat you, since a fairy is far more powerful than a man. But I shall not beat you. I prefer to leave you to mend your ways. You have been guilty of 3 bad faults today: bad temper, anger, cruelty. See that you do better tomorrow." The prince, humbled and ashamed, promised to correct his faults, and for some time kept his word. Still he had always believed that a king could do anything he chose, and when he found that he, the king, had to give up his own will, had to learn to govern his anger and his temper like the meanest churl in the kingdom, it made him both vexed and angry. Thus he began to do many a wayward, wilful thing. His companions, however, and especially a wicked foster brother, were forever praising him and telling him a king could do no wrong. Only old Suliman, his tutor, who loved him like a son, dared still tell him of his faults and urge him to correct them. Soon his ring was pricking him very often. Sometimes he stopped at its warning, but more often he did not. He insisted more and more on having his own way, and cared not how cruelly or unjustly he treated those beneath him. One day, angered at Suliman's gentle but firm remonstrances, he sent the good old man into exile, far away from court. After that, the ring annoyed him continually. Then he lost all patience with its friendly warnings, and wishing to be entirely free to do as he chose, he flung it with all his strength onto the dust heap. Now he thought he should be the happiest and freest of men. So every day he did exactly as he chose, and every day he grew more and more miserable. One day, as Cherry was walking in the fields, he saw a young girl watching her sheep and twining garlands by a brook, and she was so extremely beautiful that he resolved at once to make her his wife. Being always accustomed to have everything he wanted, and thinking that any girl would esteem herself happy to be his queen, he at once told her what he purposed. But to his astonishment, Zelia, for that was the maiden's name, replied, "Sire, I am only a shepherdess, still I will not marry you." "What? Is my appearance then displeasing to you?" asked the prince, astounded that anyone should refuse him. "Not at all," answered Zelia. "On the contrary, you are handsome. But of what use to me would be all your beauty and the riches you might give me? Every day you give way to bad temper and force all about you to do whatever you will. With you I should be miserable, and so I will not marry you." At this, Prince Cherry fell into a violent anger and bade his guards carry Zelia forcibly off to his palace. He then took counsel with his foster brother as to how he should treat the girl, At first he confided to him that he had half resolved to correct his faults, conquer his wilfulness, and try to grow virtuous to please Zelia, but this wicked companion answered: "What! Bow down to the wishes of a little shepherdess? If I were in your place, I should compel the girl to obey me. Feed her on bread and water until she comes to her senses, and if she still holds out, throw her into a dungeon as a warning to your other subjects what shall happen to them if they dare disobey you. You would be forever disgraced if you let a simple little shepherdess conquer you." "But," said Prince Cherry, "shall I not be disgraced if I harm an innocent person? After all, Zelia has committed no crime." "It is a crime not to yield to your wishes," replied the foster brother. "Rather be unjust than let anyone suppose he can safely go against your will." What the man said touched Cherry on his weakest point, and his good impulses faded. He resolved to go at once to the room where Zelia was confined, ask her once more to be his wife, and if she still refused, to cast her into a miserable dungeon. But on entering the room of the shepherdess, Cherry was astounded to find it empty. She was gone. How could she have gotten away? He had the key to the room in his pocket. Who could have helped her escape? At last the foster brother and others of Prince Cherry's friends came and told him that Suliman had come back to court and had been overheard to boast that he would set Zelia free. These men still feared the tutor's good influence over Cherry, and planned in this way to be rid of him forever. In a fury, Prince Cherry ordered his old friend to be loaded with irons and cast into prison. Then he shut himself up in his chamber and raged like a lion. Suddenly there was a sound like thunder, and there stood Candide before him. "Prince," she said sternly, "I promised your father to give you good advice, and to see that you were punished if you did not heed me. My counsel you have despised, my ring you have cast away. You still keep the outward appearance of a man, but in your heart you are no better than the beasts you chase, a lion in fury, a serpent in vengefulness, a bull in stubborn willfulness, a wolf in ferocity. Bear henceforth in your outward form the likeness of all these animals." Scarcely had Candide spoken when Prince Cherry, to his horror, found himself transformed into the monster the fairy had decreed. He had a lion's head, a bull's body and horns, a wolf's feet, and a serpent's tail. At the same time he felt himself carried away, and behold, he stood in the midst of a grove on the banks of a stream, and before him he saw in the water his own ugly form reflected. Then he heard a voice saying, "Look at thyself and know that the ugliness of thy body but expresses the ugliness of thy soul." Hoping to be rid of the sight of himself, Cherry dashed away into the depths of the forest. But scarcely had he gone 20 paces when he fell into a pit that had been dug to catch bears. In an instant the trappers who had hidden in a tree hard by were upon him. Only too pleased to have found such a strange appearing monster, they loaded him with chains, put him into a cage, and dragged him along to the capital of his own kingdom. As he drew near the city, he perceived that some great merrymaking was afoot. The trappers asked what was the cause of it all, and were informed that the people were rejoicing because Prince Cherry, their tyrannical ruler, had been struck by a thunderbolt. "His wickedness could no longer be endured," they said, "so heaven has rid the earth of the monster." 4 of his courtiers, who had been his chosen companions in evil, had wished to divide his kingdom between them, but the people had risen up and given the crown to the good old tutor Suliman. All this the monster heard, and he groaned with rage, for his own subjects whom he had ruled with an iron hand so short a time before, stood about, gaped into the cage, and made sport of him. When he was dragged into the great square before his own palace, he saw Suliman on a splendid throne, and heard all the people bless him, and pray that he might make good the injustice they had suffered under Cherry. But the good Suliman answered the people that he would only wear the crown as a viceroy. He knew that Prince Cherry was not really dead, but would some day return to rule over them, when he was become in truth the good man of whom his early years had given such rich promise. Suliman's words touched the poor beast deeply. He now felt how true had been the old man's love for him, and he ceased to beat himself against the iron bars of the cage in which the hunters were carrying him about. Quiet as a lamb, he allowed himself to be carried to a menagerie, and chained up among the other wild beasts. Little had he thought when he visited this very place as a boy, that he would some day be shut up there. The time had come at length when he was ready to admit that he had deserved all that had come upon him, and he resolved to begin at once to amend his ways by being obedient to the keeper who cared for him. This was no easy task, for the man often treated the animals cruelly. One day while the keeper was sleeping, a tiger broke loose from his cage and sprang upon him. At first Cherry felt a thrill of pleasure at the thought of getting even with the man, but almost instantly he refused such a thought and wished earnestly that he were free to help him. No sooner had he become conscious of this good wish than presto, the doors of his cage swung open and he rushed to the assistance of the keeper. The man had been almost overcome, but Cherry leaped upon the tiger and struggled until he had killed the beast. Then he flung himself at the feet of the man he had saved, longing to be petted. The keeper, in gratitude, lifted his hand to stroke him, but as he did so, a voice was heard saying, "Good actions are never unrewarded." And there stood before him not a frightful monster, but a pretty little dog. Cherry, delighted to find himself so changed, leaped up and licked the keeper's hand. Won by his caresses, the man took him up into his arms. Soon after this, the keeper carried him off to the king of a neighboring kingdom with whom he had certain dealings. To him he related the wonderful story of the little creature, and the queen at once expressed the wish to have the dog for her own. With her he was lodged so elegantly and treated so kindly that he would have been well content could he have forgotten Zelia and the fact that he was once a man. One day he took the piece of bread which had been given him for his breakfast, and being seized with a fancy to eat it in the palace garden, went off toward the banks of a stream where he often drank. But when he reached the spot, instead of the stream, he saw rising up a splendid palace glittering with gold and precious gems. Fine as this palace appeared, there wandered before it a young woman who seemed to be half famished. She was looking about the lovely garden and vainly trying to find amidst all its flowery grandeur something that she could eat. "Poor thing," said Cherry to himself, "she is far more in need of food than I. I must help her." So the little dog ran up to her and dropped his bread at her feet. The young woman picked up the bread and ate it gratefully. Soon she looked quite herself again, and then Cherry saw to his great amazement that she was no other than his beloved Zelia. But no sooner had he recognized this amazing fact than 4 ruffians rushed out of the woods, seized her and dragged her off forcibly toward the palace. Alas, what could a little dog do to defend his loved one? Oh, how he wished himself a monster again, that he might have power to save her. He ran forward and barked at the men and bit their heels, but they chased him away with heavy blows and dragged Zelia into the palace. Then Cherry laid down sadly in front of the door to keep watch. "What?" thought he. "I can see the wickedness of these men who have carried Zelia away. And yet, did I not do the same thing myself? Did I not think to cast her into prison? Who knows how much more wickedness I might have done to her and to others, if heaven's justice had not stopped me in time." At that moment he heard the voice in the air repeat again, "Good actions are never unrewarded." And Cherry found himself changed into a beautiful little white pigeon. The first use he made of his wings was to fly up to the palace windows in search of Zelia. He found one window open, entered, and flew through the whole rich palace. but nowhere did he see a single sign of his loved one. She had disappeared entirely. Then he made his way out again, full of sorrow, and resolved to fly over the whole wide world, if need be, till he found her. He flew and he flew. Over many countries he flew, and at last he came to the waste and barren desert. Here in a cave, sharing with an old hermit his frugal breakfast, he found the lovely Zelia. Transported with joy, he flew to her, perched on her shoulder, and expressed by every means in his power the joy he felt in seeing her. Zelia, charmed by the gentleness of the little bird, and seeing that he was trying to say he devoted himself to her, softly stroked him with her hand. "Hast thou come to stay with me?" she cried. "Then will I love thee always." "What hast thou done, Zelia?" cried the hermit. For even as she spoke these words, the white pigeon vanished, and there in its place, in his true form once more, appeared Prince Cherry. Moreover, the form of the hermit began to change. His soiled garments became of dazzling whiteness, and his long beard and withered countenance grew into the shining hair and lovely face of the fairy Candide. "Prince," said she, "you regained your true form when you lost the last of the traits that made you beast-like, and so won Zelia to pledge you her faith. She has always loved your true nature, and now that it is no more hidden by faults, you shall always live happily together." Then Cherry and Zelia, grasping each other by the hand, threw themselves at the fairy's feet. "Rise, my children," said Candide. "I shall now transport you to your kingdom, and restore to Cherry the crown of which he is at last worthy." She had scarcely spoken the words when they found themselves in the chamber of Suliman. The old man was delighted to find his beloved pupil now a worthy son of the good king. He willingly gave back to him his throne and became the most faithful of his subjects. So King Cherry and Queen Zelia reigned together many years, and the fairy Candide restored to Cherry the valuable ring which he had cast away. But it is said that henceforth he governed himself so well that he was able to govern others justly, and the ring never had to prick him severely again. End of section 72. Recording by Maricel Cui.